Hi, welcome to the Size Research Corner. I'm Katzer, a crocheter of life-size Pokemon and self-proclaimed Pokemon-size researcher. This is my little corner of the internet where I take the time to explain and occasionally complain about how we measure Pokemon. Today, we are talking about Magnemite. And before I start, just remember that we are here to have fun. It is not that deep, and this entire series can be as serious or silly as you want to make it. Either way is fine. But there are too many conflicting official sources to possibly believe in a true answer, so nobody is wrong for thinking something different than me or you. No fighting about it. So Magnemite. It is one of the very first Pokemon that piqued my interest when I started making life-size Pokemon years ago. I saw it, there were three possible ways to measure a Magnemite. So 1 foot or 30 centimeters could refer possibly to its wingspan, the distance between the two magnets, which in this case is also the largest dimension. So I started crocheting one and quickly realized that that would actually make a very small looking Magnemite, and it did not seem realistic to me. Moving on to our next option, arguably the most kind of obvious way to measure height would be from like the bottom of Magnemite to the top of the screw on its head. You know, bottom to top. And I also made this one, which I liked. Intuitively, this felt pretty accurate, you know? That seemed like about how a Magnemite should be sized. But for the sake of good content, I wanted to make it all three ways. So the third way that I figured was if only the sphere, the body itself of Magnemite counted towards its 30 centimeter height. And I thought, it's very plausible that this could be the option too, because we do see a lot of Pokemon where maybe their ears don't count. There's features that don't count towards height all the time. So I made a third version where the body itself is a full 30 centimeters. But then it came time to look at Magneton. Magneton is a 1 meter Pokemon, 3'3", 100 centimeters, and that is more than 3 times bigger than Magnemite. Magneton also has a less obvious form, I would argue, for measuring. So generally, we can't measure it the same way that we did Magnemite, which is usually how I approach evolutions, is measuring them with consistency across the line. But it also seems worth acknowledging that Magneton is just a collection of 3 Magnemite held together by magnetic forces. And this is echoed in pretty much every Pokedex entry we've ever had for Magneton, including this hilarious yet needlessly harsh one from Pokemon Sun. And so given that Magneton is just a collection of 3 Magnemite, I figured I could use my Magnemite, the plushies I had already made to scale, to help determine which dimension would make the most sense to measure. But the problem came that if we're using that middle-sized Magnemite, where you include the height of its screw, there is no orientation of 3 of those that can add up to a meter. So that was unfortunate. But then I looked towards my larger 30 centimeter bodied Magnemite, and if I were to lay 3 of those out as a Magneton and then measure from the highest point of the screw to the lowest tip of its bottom magnet, that was exactly 1 meter. It was just kind of cool. That was a pretty cool moment when I pulled out the measuring tape. So that felt like an answer to me. That felt like all the evidence I needed that the line makes the most fluid sense if we measure Magnemite with just its body. I was happy with that answer. But then, as I started trying to collect footage to make this video, I was seeing what I wanted to see, really, in both Legends Arceus and in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. When you collect perfectly average specimens of both Pokemon, Magnemite is the exact same size as each of the individual Magnemites in a Magneton. The sizes lined up, as though they don't change throughout evolution. That's what I was here to talk about. Except, I couldn't help but notice that just, in general, the Magnetons were not looking 3 times bigger than these Magnemite. And when I tried to compare Magnemite to a Rowlet, another 30 centimeter Pokemon, I found that their bodies were not the same size. Even looking at some of these 30 centimeter Pokemon compared to my trainer wasn't really lining up either.
So that means there's only 3.25 Piplups in a trainer. That would make my trainer 130 centimeters, 4.3 feet. Like that. What? This trainer is not 4'4". That's not possible. And yet, whether I measure in Solosis or Piplup, that's the answer I get. So there's something, I guess, wonky.
And herein lies the fundamental shortcoming of using any of these 3D overworld games as size comparison tools. So to help illustrate this point, I actually want to look at Pokemon Home. Because although I've criticized Pokemon Home in the past for just taking stock art and scaling it to whatever size it says, not using any context, not really paying attention to, which features should and shouldn't count, that kind of thing, that's exactly what's going to be helpful to illustrate this point. If we look at Pokemon Home and we compare Magnemite to Magneton, this shows us just how different 30 centimeters and a meter are. We can visualize that difference so clearly with the way that they have just flat scaled them. And this is the point where we need to face the realities of building open world Pokemon games like they have. Because while there's certainly a lot of effort put into like striving for that experience of seeing all of these different creatures in their natural environment and how they look compared to each other and all of that, there's also an absolute sweet spot for the range of sizes that work well as models. So when you compare Pokemon that are all the same size to each other, I think that's where they've really put in the work and they've done a good job making sure that those are proportional to each other. But when you start trying to scale Pokemon outside of their size range to a different Pokemon of a different size, that's where it starts to break down. Because although every 30 centimeter Pokemon is going to be the same size as another 30 centimeter Pokemon, and every meter Pokemon is going to be the same size as every other meter tall Pokemon, there's definitely not linear scaling of how those representations of Pokemon appear, like relative to a trainer. Which is something that I'd kind of been aware of for a long time now. Like every time I tried to pinpoint the height of my trainer by comparing her to a Pokemon, it was giving a pretty wide range of wonky answers. So I always knew something was kind of up there, but this is the moment that I really had to face it and admit it. It just doesn't work comparing Pokemon across sizes like that. So, knowing that comparing Magnemite to Magneton was not really valid anymore, and that comparing Magnemite to other 30 centimeter Pokemon was a much more reliable system, I had to kind of face that actually middle-sized Magnemite was probably our winner all along. This seems to be how it scales compared to other Pokemon in its size. Which does seem to mean that Magnemite's body does grow during evolution, despite Magneton just being 3 Magnemite. And I that's a little bit of a bummer. It was really cool when I thought it worked out perfectly, but we do see this. We know for a fact that the 3 Diglett joined together to make up a Dugtrio, grow massively. So it's within the range of what we will accept here. And then finally, to close this all out, we should talk about Magnezone. Honestly, I never found Magnezone as interesting because its form shifts so much. But you could almost see it as a return to form for Magnemite, as though maybe those 3 Magnemite have finally fused into a true single being, because it kind of goes back to its original shape. It's got a body with magnets coming off it and a screw on the top of its head. And what I found measuring 3'11" or 1.2 meter Magnezone against other Pokemon the same size as it, you seem to measure it from the bottom of its body to the top of its screw. Just tying everything all back together. Which actually made me feel better about the whole situation. So there you have it. I have now officially flip-flopped on which version of Magnemite I think is the accurate one a couple times, because you will find old videos of me telling you that it seems to be the largest one, and I am now here saying, actually no, it's probably that middle one. But as of today, that is my stance. Magnemite, 30 centimeters measured from the bottom of its body to the top of its screw. Magneton, 1 meter, measured still from the lowest point to the highest point. And Magnezone, 1.2 meters, measured from the bottom of its body to the top of its screw. So I think I'll be sticking with this answer for a while, unless new evidence comes out to the contrary, in which case please tell me about it below. I want to know all of the sources I can look at. So thanks for watching. If you have enjoyed this, make sure you're subscribed. This is an ongoing series. There'll be a playlist of some of the other episodes I've done so far at the end of the video. I do plan to revisit some of my Hop-Ep research to talk a little bit more about jump love specifically coming up soon. And I also foresee an episode about Beldam, Metang, and Metagross in the near future. That's the next one I want to hop into some research on. So if you want to hear about any of that, I hope we'll see you in the next one.